Thank you so much, Stella. I'm going to start off and then kind of introduce Kevin. So I'm a clinical psychologist and for many years had a psychotherapy practice and executive coaching, and I write psychology textbooks for undergraduates and do kind of weird research. And I got interested in virtual reality because I had been certified in hypnosis. And there's a thing in hypnosis called dual consciousness, which is where you hold the reality of what you're experiencing in trance at the same time that you hold the reality that your body is somewhere else, right? So you're sitting in a couch in my office, but your mind is somewhere else. And in fact, your brain registers the trance experience as real. I mean, you're not psychotically real. I mean, it knows it's trance, but if I'm treating you for an elevator phobia with hypnosis, you're in the elevator in trance, you'll feel like you're in an elevator. And I got interested in VR because about 25 years ago, there started to be a very early academic literature on the psychology of VR. And lo and behold, it's that same dual consciousness, that the reality of what you're experiencing in the headset, right? You can hold that, but also hold the fact that your body is not where your mind is. And that was actually how I got interested in VR. And then I followed the literature for many years and had the good fortune to do some research with a premier American academic psychologist out at Stanford, Jeremy Bailenson, who does a lot of research. And I would encourage you to look at his website. It's the Virtual Human Interaction Lab, VHIL at stanford.edu. He does amazing work. But what happened was while I was working with him in about 2012, 2013, we were hearing about all the young Black men being killed by police officers. And we're sort of back where we started, unfortunately. But back then, that led to a surge in Black Lives Matter. And that led some white people to say, white lives matter. And I would not presume to know the lived experience of being Black, but from being a psychologist and writing textbooks, I know enough that it made me think if we could give the people who said white lives matter, really enough of a sense of what it is to live while Black, that I didn't think they'd say that. And that was the idea for my company, Live in Their World. And so what we do is we have a program that in part uses virtual reality to address issues of bias and incivility in the workplace and teach people skills for respectful engagement. So for instance, we could put you in the body of a Black man, Javante, at work, and have you experience the kinds of things that he experiences. And when you look down, of course, you see his hand, your hands are Black. And so it's a really powerful experience. And so I met Kevin because I had a script that I needed to film in VR, and we got connected and have worked together ever since. And so without further ado, I'm now going to turn it over to Kevin. And I'm happy to, in the Q&A, to talk more about the company if anyone's interested. Kevin.
Thank you very much, Robin, for that introduction, and everyone here for putting this all together. I'm going to share my screen so you can kind of see I have a little PowerPoint that goes with this. I'm just going to talk kind of about the background of how to create virtual reality films and kind of what got me into it. Can you guys see my screen, by the way? Yeah, okay. So I got into virtual reality filmmaking basically right when I saw the early Oculus developer. This was like probably 2014, 2015, I tried this. And then cameras started to become available and YouTube really opened it up in 2015. And I was blown away by it. The first time I tried this, I was at NASA Ames Research Center, and it was very low quality, but I was like, man, it would be cool one day when you can get Brad Pitt in here, And little I know, like less than a year later, we'd be at that point with the cameras. And I had done some background filming with AR cameras. This is will.i.am. So I was very interested in AR, but when I tried VR for the first time and saw the potential with those cameras, I knew that that was really what I was more passionate about. And so we started to do a daily video on YouTube to learn about this, to teach people, and use as a bounce board to see like what works and what doesn't work. And slowly we started to see that like everybody was, tuning in, writing comments. And I realized that, I saw the New York Times start to promote daily 360 video and put out the Google Cardboard. And I said, wow, the New York Times is kind of copying our business model. That's must be good news. And so I got connected with Robin after doing work with a couple of other organizations that were very high level, like the 49ers. We filmed Colin Kaepernick, his last year there, which was very powerful. We filmed kneeling and all of that. And it's interesting to look at that in hindsight now with, the clash we kind of had with being able to put that footage out there. And we got a lot of pushback from 49ers media, but I'm not going to get into that too much. But with Robin's project, we decided we weren't going to do 360 video, which is something that I was had more experience in, that we were going to try and do VR 180, which 2 years after 360, Google and Facebook, all these different big organizations said VR 180 sort of the new thing, because it's the benefits of 360. But what they found is a lot of people weren't looking behind them. And also a lot of directors weren't really leaning into that space, traditional directors, because they couldn't have Video Village and the sound people and their director's chair and the makeup folks and all that. So it became a thing with VR 180 where more people, I noticed, were starting to use it. And you also got a lot better stereoscopics or 3D video. So we started to look at the different cameras that were in the market at the time. And there's the Lenovo Mirage, which is like $100 now. The Kandao Q-Cam, which is $300 now. And you can kind of see what those look like. The Q-Cam flips. Yes, Rob?
I just wanted to say a word about the Lenovo Mirage, because Kevin I have no technical expertise, but in order to inexpensively film things and see how they worked, the Lenovo Mirage is fantastic because you can buy a companion headset. And so literally you take the SD card that's in you film with the Lenovo Mirage, take the SD card and you just put it in the Lenovo headset, and you can see the experience. So if you really want to try things and experiment, it's a way without doing learning a lot of technical skills to be able to give it a try. And then you can do it with professional people like Kevin.
It was definitely like a little training ground for us to see kind of what we're trying out, POV, different aspects of how to film. But certainly this is like 8mm compared with what we ended up shooting on. That's more like 35. So you can see the Kandao has the double functionality of being able to fold. So it can do the VR 180 and also fold in and do 360. So the lenses kind of flip, whereas the Lenovo is just VR 180. And that's pretty good for photos. And I did like the Q-Cam for a little bit for just filming fun things. My daughter going to the farm, little farm in Berkeley here. But, certainly to tell you a little bit more about 360, the challenge is you have to film both sides. It's a lot more work to film 360 than VR 180 because you're having to clear a whole set, especially for narrative. For documentary, it's kind of here or there. But what we saw is that with VR 180, you're dealing a lot more with 3D and stereoscopics. And there's a lot of different ways that you can showcase this. But for me, I really like that aspect of having 3D. And with traditional 360 cameras, to achieve 3D, you need a massive rig like this, which is very expensive. And again, you have to deal with the subject being further away because you have so many cameras you're accounting for. Now with VR 180, you're just dealing with the two front-facing cameras. And the benefit is you are still full peripheral. So you can look all the way around you. So it is the closest thing to the human experience, in my opinion, because I can't see behind my head. I don't got eyes in the back of my head, as the saying goes. But we did look at these other cameras as well. This is the Views XR. Let me, if I move this to the side, how do I move this? Try that. There you go. The Views XR at $399, and then the Insta360 Evo, which is a fold-outable one. And those are both really great. I'd say this is like the 16mm. But with Robin's project, we looked even further ahead because while these are great cameras, they weren't especially good for low light, and we were dealing with locations where we didn't have a lot of control over the lighting. So we ended up looking into this range of camera, the Zcam K1 Pro, which retails now for around $3,000, plus or minus accessories and things like that. There's also the Zcam K2 Pro, which just came out recently, which is $6,000, but that is a huge jump up. And I would say what you're seeing everyone use is pretty much the K1 Pro because it is professional quality. It is around 6K resolution. It can do live streaming. So it's what Oculus and Facebook use for all of their Oculus Venues projects. But certainly now I'm curious about the K2 Pro because that recently did come out. I have a couple more slides here. This just goes to show you that next level with 360 3D. And you can see the price tag just goes up even more, which further proves why VR 180 is kind of the thing that a lot of people have been doing, at least people in the documentary world, the narrative world. I've seen a lot more projects like that happening. And again, it depends on your viewer. If your viewer has a Google Daydream and they're sitting on a couch, are they really going to look behind? I don't know. I think they're mainly going to stay looking forward because that's what people are used to. It's what we've been trained into as a habit. But they will look left and right and up and down. But again, looking completely behind you is a big cost difference. Anyway, that's kind of my little spiel there. And I figure if you guys have any questions, we can open it up and I'll do my stop the screen share. Cool.
I also, while you're percolating on that, I also wanted to zoom out a little bit about why VR, aside for the fact that it's cool and sexy and a wow experience. There's some really terrific research over the last few years about VR, the content that you see in VR compared to regular video, compared to text. So the philanthropy literature, sort of charitable organizations have been out front in doing the research on this. So some of you may have seen the New York Times or other organizations have where they put you in the experience of being a refugee in a refugee camp. There have been a number of videos like that, of VR videos, of literally putting you in the place of someone. That's one of the things that VR does incredibly well. It's really perspective taking, which induces empathy. And so what they find is if you saw, let's take as an example, refugee case in a refugee camp, if you saw it in a VR headset compared to you seeing it, on your computer screen, compared to reading exactly the same content in text. And then you right before this, you had played a game and won money. So you have some new little disposable amounts of money. And then you see the experience, and then you're asked to donate. And it turns out that people who had the VR experience donate more frequently, and when they donate in higher amounts compared to the people who saw the video or the regular video, or the people who saw but just read the text. So this variants of this study have been done. There are probably almost half a dozen examples of this now. VR is incredibly powerful, as I say, because your brain, partially registers the experience as real, and it gives you someone else's perspective on steroids. And so people may have seen Chris Milk has a TED Talk about virtual reality. And he talks about it as an empathy machine, an empathy device, empathy-inducing device. And empathy has sort of three components. One is cognitive empathy, which is that it's also called theory of mind, which is you can think what other people are thinking, right? So we do this all the time. If you want to talk to a friend about something, you already have in your mind how that friend is going to respond. You want to tell your parents or your kids something, you have a model of what the person's going to say. That's a kind of cognitive empathy. Then there's emotional empathy, which is where you feel what they seem to feel. So, and that's often what's behind what's called emotional contagion. So if you're with someone who's angry, right, you may feel yourself getting enervated and getting angry. Or someone is really happy, you get happy. And that's a kind of emotional empathy. And then there's what's called compassionate empathy, which really relies on the other two types of empathy. And that's where you're motivated to act, that you feel and think enough that you want to do something. And that's in part what's happening, outside our windows right now. This week is that the experience of Christian Cooper in New York, I'm in New York City, so this is really a live thing for me, of Mr. Floyd, we can go on and on, but people are having compassionate empathy and motivated to act. And so what virtual reality does as a medium is it provides, done well, by the way, I should interrupt, because it's a tool, so it can be done well or it can be done poorly. But when it's done well, it's a very, very powerful tool for inducing potentially all three kinds of empathy. And so the research that I mentioned in philanthropy is in fact about compassionate empathy, because those people were compelled to act and donate more frequently and donate at higher amounts. But I just want to stop here, see if people have questions for Kevin on technical things or anything we've said so far before we kind of go further. Let me check that.
Feel free to unmute yourself. Any questions? Maria, I believe you do VR for learning, right? Are you seeing the same effective results? Yeah.
Yes, and I really appreciate the getting to know Kevin, and beautiful job on all those cameras, Kevin. Excited to get that big one. That's exciting.
Yeah, I've used that on like one shoot for a client where they rented it, and I was like, whoa, you pulled out the big guns today, you know.
Yeah, but there's again, in terms of being an empathy engine, absolutely, I agree. And it was great to see those other different perspectives on empathy, so I appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing what Kevin's going to show us next. Yeah.
I don't have any more PowerPoint or presentation, but I will say in terms of empathy, we do a lot of work with different social justice organizations and organizations that are trying to build empathy for their nonprofit and groups. So like one that I would suggest is checking out this piece in the Bay Area we shot around homelessness. And it's 4 different episodes. This was sponsored by YouTube, and the YouTube channel and the nonprofit is called Invisible People. And that's, I think, very, very powerful. You know, we do a variety of different work. Right now we're doing a piece that is a social justice series as well. I can't talk too much about that, but it's about racial injustice in the court system. So definitely, you know, been following a lot of what's happening in the news with the protests, especially in the Bay Area.
So Kevin, I had a question in terms of your workflow. Could you share a little bit of how you initiate a project and how you go from the beginning to the end of a project in terms of the workflow, a few high level things?
Yeah. Often, you know, in order to figure out what camera would work best for whatever project, we talk with our clients, we talk with the story people and find out what is the story, what do you visually need to see in order to make this work? And then we kind of work from there to figure out what is the best camera that would tell this story. And lately I've been finding that the Zcam K1 Pro is pretty much the best tool out there for the price, if you can afford it. If not, the Evo for like $420 or whatever you can find on Amazon, that is also very good quality and gets near comparable quality. But there are just slight little differences that if you look at it enough, especially in headset, you can tell. And then our post-production workflow is we edit, you know, we have I got over here, big computer I use to do editing. And I often will use a headset, which is connected there. Or sometimes I use an old-fashioned tool, just these 3D glasses, which allow me to see if something is with the right disparity, which means how far the 3D is in space.
Can I ask a question here?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is fascinating. This is just so brilliant and so exciting. But the question is in terms of practicality in the classroom, of being able to kind of actually create something or have your students engaged in creating something. Where is kind of the reality set in terms of really being able to find a opportunity to engage and then immerse your students?
Well, I could take that one. I would say that, you know, the camera prices are getting lower and lower every day. It's like the rising tide of technology is what I call it. But basically, I think that, you know, the headsets are pretty cheap now, $200 to $100 a pop. And again, it all depends. If you do Google Cardboard, you can make it even more cost effective. Ultimately, I think it's about people learning how to film in this medium, how to set up the camera, you know, and the best way to learn is through doing. And so I teach college students as well. I've taught classes for Academy of Art University in downtown San Francisco, and also the San Francisco Art Institute. Did a class last summer that I taught that was combined with Shanghai University. So that was very interesting because I've never done a class with translators. So like, I thought there'd be like a lost in translation moment when I'm talking about like disparity and 360 and all these kind of technical terms. But I think at the end of the day, everybody sees things the same. If you put on a headset, you look around, you understand what it's like in that story a bit more than just the standard frame. And I think it has to do with just how the medium of storytelling has evolved. We used to have just written word, and then, you know, even before that, probably oral tradition. And now we have television sets, and that's how we're getting our stories through Netflix, and that's our legends of what's going on. But I think the closest thing to reality, how we see things, is if you could see full peripheral, if you're there in person. And it's interesting to see how people retain that information more. The studies that marketing and advertisers have done, they've taken the same footage, shown it like this, shown it in VR headsets, and people retain it more. And I wonder if that can be, you know, used more for law enforcement training, for instance, to show more empathy. I've seen some studies with that out of Stanford and different organizations, but I think that that could be a really powerful way that we can transform maybe law enforcement in this country at this time when we really need to see change happening, and we need to see officers putting themselves in the shoes of people being pulled over.
That's a great point.
I hope that answers the question.
A couple of additional thoughts. So one is Live in the World, my company. Originally, everything was built to go in an Oculus Go headset. This was before the Quest came out, and it was a good price point, and we really didn't need a lot of the extra features that come with an Oculus Quest. And the idea is that employees would have the VR experience in their office. You know, people would sign up and they just go into a, you know, cubicle, and people would just schedule themselves. And of course, COVID hit, and so people are not going into the office. And so we've been retooling, and I just wanted to bring this up because you don't actually have to do a huge, expensive way of using VR. This is a $20 carrier for phones. You can email me, but it's called the Viotech Spectre. And what you do is you take your smartphone and you put it in here, and then you put it on like this. And it's not as good as a real VR headset, but it is as good as you can get cheaply. And so I just want to put in a pitch for mobile VR, because especially during the time of COVID, it's, I think, a really good alternative. And so we are, in fact, pivoting to remote viewing because for obvious reasons. So
Go.
as a medium, I think that's, sorry, Jeff, you wanted to say something about that? Oh.
So Jeff had a question.
Okay.
Can you do VR in real time?
That's a Kevin question.
So yeah, you can do live streaming of VR. One camera I would recommend for that I didn't have on my list though is the Insta360 One X. This I also use as a dash cam whenever I'm driving. Captured some pretty crazy things like trees falling on my car, someone rear-ending me. It definitely has helped me with Geico before, so worth the price, I think, in that way. But you can also plug it into your phone and use it with your smartphone to live stream. And the quality might not be as good as if you have, you know, an Oculus, you know, and you got your VR 180 cameras that cost a lot of money plugged into a satellite truck. But again, it's pretty good quality in my opinion. And I've done a couple of live streams. You can check out my YouTube channel and kind of see more, you know, different videos that you can compare quality. But I filmed with that like probably like an hour or so of live talking in 360. Another question I see here from Ida. Can you recommend any courses or resources online for the learning and more technical aspects of filming for VR? I have a ton of tutorials, playlist as well that features other YouTube channels. I recommend Creator Up too. He's probably the best out there, Hugh. So that kind of is my answer for that. Again, it depends if you want to do more photography based. You got Ben Claremont. You got people who are doing virtual tours that they have their own YouTube channels that are more specific. So all depends what you want to know. Is the list of equipment that Kevin mentioned available? I'll add in the chat. I have an Amazon store that it doesn't cost anything more, but it has everything listed there. And Amazon like throws me a nickel, you know, for every however much they make. So I'll post that in 1 second on the chat. I see one more question, and this is about what software do you use to edit? For 360 video, I primarily like to use Apple's Final Cut Pro. This just has a lot of great plugins already in there that help with erasing the tripod and things like that. but for VR 180, I prefer Adobe Premiere. And I'm completely unbiased. I beta tested for both of them. They're both great companies creating awesome software. I wish that one of them would figure out how to do mobile editing of 360 video on my phone so I can edit on my phone. But I think that either Apple will do it because they already have the software on their computers, or Adobe will do it because they have Adobe Rush, which is a mobile platform that lets you edit right now. That's pretty good, but not good for VR yet. I'll pass it to Robin for, I think there's other questions in the chat.
Yeah. So VR in therapy or coaching. So actually the early literature, academic literature was terrific using VR for coaching, or sorry, using VR for therapy. So the first application that I know of was for phobias and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and with terrific results. So for phobias, it's sort of obvious. It makes sense if you have a fear of flying or, you know, spiders or something that you wouldn't otherwise encounter in a therapist's office, you know, fear of elevators. And I actually have used VR for the treatment of phobias with patients, and it's terrific. I mean, it's really terrific. And it's, again, the track record empirically is wonderful. For coaching, so it's very interesting in the workplace. Learning and development, L&D, is a big place where virtual reality is being used now. And there's a company called Striver. Jeremy Balinson, the guy at Stanford, has a company called Striver. And they're doing a lot with very specific, focused kinds of training that are otherwise really hard to practice. So it could be you're a nuclear power plant engineer, or, you know, the person who's at the board of a nuclear power plant. Is very expensive. Mistakes are unbelievably costly in human life, let alone financially. And so it's like a simulator that you can run through to really learn something viscerally. I mean, it is a simulator, and it's being used that way to both teach and practice. Surgeons, same thing. It's being used for surgeons with haptic gloves. So you have the complete sort of circle of experience of not just being there, but what you're touching and what you're doing. And so it's an incredibly powerful learning tool. We're using it for soft skills. So, you know, one of the things that we want to teach people is how to give feedback and how to take feedback. And so both of those are really important soft skills that make the working relationship go much better. And as I'm sure that you know, incivility in the workplace is incredibly costly. And so in terms of people intentionally slowing down their work product, of, oh, was I supposed to get that to you this afternoon? I'm sorry, I didn't see your email, right? So there's that kind of slowdown. There's the kind of slowdown where I just don't want to be around you because I feel like you dissed me. You were disrespectful to me. And so I'm going to go out of my way to avoid you as much as I possibly can. It's costly in terms of attrition. Incivility in the workplace has teams that don't innovate. And so, you know, again, that's what we're trying to approach, which is really how to teach or reteach people civility skills. None of us will ever get it right all the time, but it's giving people the benefit of the doubt and then helping each other learn. And that's what we're trying to do. And again, that's a sweet spot for virtual reality as well. So yes, it's terrific for coaching. It's terrific for therapy. It's really terrific for repetitive motor skills that have a high cost in real life for learning. So as you know, as I said, with surgery or expensive things, they've done some great studies with some complicated physical tool thing of putting something together that was, you either have to read the instructions and then you go work on it, or read the next step and then go work on it. And it's people who do this all the time and they have to keep doing that. And they got 33% more efficient by having a headset, that was an AR headset on while they were doing it. But for VR, it's a similar thing, which is you overlearn it once and then you know how to do it. So, yeah, let me see if there were any other questions.
Great questions from Yanis. I think it's kind of the measurement of efficacy between reality exposure and virtual exposure, and then around cultural bias. when we talk about empathy, you know, there are different cross-cultural sort of dimensions of empathy, right? Or perceptions of civility, let's put it that way. If you're looking at Anglo-Saxon culture, very direct, very straightforward in your face, or you're looking at Asian cultures. How can you, that's for example, in our line of work, you're going to send an expat to Asia. You know, can you provide an experience of what an Asian code of civility might look like?
Yes.
Like it might feel like. I think that would be one of the examples where I would say that type of experience will be very helpful.
Absolutely. The cross-cultural issues around respectful behavior and civility and incivility are costly from a psychological perspective. They're also fascinating, and they can absolutely be addressed with VR or honestly any other really good medium that uses the tool well. So yes, absolutely. There are, I actually, when I started to read your question on us about are there ratio of VR exposure to reality exposure before one's brain mixes realities, that is a terrific question. So the recommendation for VR is sort of about 20-25 minutes at a pop. There are a lot of reasons for that. Let me step back a second to address that question. And now I'm going to go back to hypnosis. So kids the world over are highly hypnotizable. If anyone here has seen Toy Story, you know, the kids' imagination, they really see toys move. You know, they are self-hypnotizing all the time. In non-Western cultures, adults, almost all adults retain that high level of hypnotizability. In Western societies, among adults, it actually it changes, and it's a normally distributed skill, right? So some small percentage are highly hypnotizable, some small percentage are very low hypnotizable, and most people are in the middle. There's something about Western culture that kind of wrings the hypnotizability out of half the population. What happens for people who are highly hypnotizable in the world, it's like lucid dreaming when you go into a trance state. And so you kind of get confused. If you ever had a really powerful dream, right, and you wake up and you're confused about if it really happened or not, if it was a realistic based dream, right? You get like, you know, your intimate partner was really obnoxious to you in the dream, and you wake up pissed at your partner because there's that residue of it being real. And this isn't talked about a lot in VR, but I think there is an interesting potential for, it's a tool like any other, used for good or ill. Some of that's going to depend on the individual person. But if I'm in VR and I went to Mars in VR, I know that it's not real, right? I'm not likely to get confused. But if I go to Disneyland in VR and I've never been to Disney, I will have had, a year from now, I will say, yeah, I went to Disneyland, right? Because we have what's called source memory confusion, which is we misremember the source of our memories. And so I'm likely to get confused about whether it was a VR experience or an actual experience. Whether you're in the VR headset for 25 minutes or more or less won't matter. It's about the impact of the experience. So they've done studies of VR with kids swimming with dolphins, where kids are kind of underwater. You know, they're actually having the VR experience of swimming with dolphins. And they remember later having swum with dolphins, swam. So there is a lot of possibility for getting the VR experience confused with reality. And it's going to be, you know, I consider VR to be a stealth technology that society hasn't really prepared for. As an example, if I'm doing a first-person shooter game in VR, right? Instead of it hovering over me like many computer games do, I'm actually in it. And let's say that I even have a haptic suit on now, because we're going to have that. We already have it. So I feel recoil, when I shoot. And now I'm a juror on a murder case, and I have killed someone with glee. Will that virtual reality experience shift how I'm likely to vote? I don't know in which direction, but it very well may, right? So we don't know the ways that VR will affect society, but the odds are high that it will.
Definitely therapeutically, because I've heard of VR being used to, again, just to test the impact on Alzheimer's and dementia. And with some very interesting results. I think I'm not clinically trained, so I can't comment on that, but I certainly heard about, experiments with VR and those types of memory loss, different memory loss conditions. There are some really great comments here. I mean, first of all, Nina's question, and Maria tried to answer it, about how to get started if you have not, if you have not really done much in VR, both from the technical perspective and maybe Robin, from you. So Kevin, how to get started?
Well, I kind of do want to answer that other question as well a little bit, just because I have a little bit to say on it. They have done a lot of research, HTC Vive particularly, about like the longest time people can spend in a VR headset, and literally mapping out their apartment so they can walk with the headset and there's enough trackers and the headsets are wireless. So, at what point does it blur the reality, when they reach out to grab, something? We've already seen an instance of a guy in Russia who died while in VR. He like fell through a glass table. So, I think people are already kind of confusing their realities with their phones. So we're going to see this like much bigger fold with, headsets and AR glasses. I think particularly about like kids getting hit by trains when on their, looking down on their phones and things like that, which is news stories we've heard all around the world. That's been very disturbing and sad. I will say that I will point to two films that also kind of look at this. They're narrative films. One is called Creative Control, and it's more about AR and these AR glasses, and basically someone's starting to confuse people in their real life with, AR simulations they might have as well. And that has Reggie Watts in it, and it's pretty funny and very interesting. That came out 2016. And then 2013, this great movie, The Congress, with Robin Wright, where Robin Wright is a famous actress in it, and she gets virtually, like, she's the first VR actress out there, like, and they can put her in 1 million movies and she stays young forever. But then they also sold the rights to her avatar, so anyone in the VR world could then become Robin Wright and walk around and do things. And by the end of the movie, everybody's like walking around with their headsets on, and they take them off, and it's like a very dystopic, sad world where everyone's homeless, and there are a lot of problems in the real world that they've ignored because, they can be whoever they want in the headset. So that's a really great film that I'd recommend that showed at Con. The first one, Creative Control, and then the other one, The Congress. Yeah. So, and then in terms of how do you get started? I mean, I just say pick up a camera and start filming something, anything to learn and to try the headset out and to see what works. That is the best way. And that's what we said about like using, the 8mm before you go out and film the 35mm. It's what everybody does. Their screen tests of Marlon Brando, even, where it's the low camera because they don't want to spend the big budget. And I think that that's a smart way to do it, because you can learn right away what works and what sticks. That's it.
I do think from a capital management perspective, I think the issue about how to use VR, or human capital management, how to use VR and when, it can be such a really cool wow experience that like any new tool, people think, oh, it can be used for anything. And I think if you have a hammer, the whole world looks like a nail. And I think the interesting thing is figuring out where its best use cases, or best use cases, I should say, are, because it's not, to do it well is often not cheap. And it's, how does it compare to what's already out there? And I think that's always the question, is sort of what's the data and where's the savings and what's the ROI? And so as VR has gone from the lab into the rest of the world, we're learning what the ROI is and where there's ROI and where it's just a sexy new toy, and it's a sexy new toy, but the ROI may not be there.
So Robin, speaking of the enterprise solutions, Paul is asking, do you have solutions that are already packaged for client use around immersive diversity experience?
I do. I just feel free to email me and I'm happy to tell you about it. I mean, there are some companies doing it. I don't know. There are some other companies doing it. We're all kind of quiet about what exactly we do. So I don't know exactly what they do, but I do know some of the ways that our program is different. And again, it depends on what it is, what your goal is, and how many resources you want to commit to it in terms of employee time and expense, and are your workers remote, and for how long are they likely to be remote, and do people want to put on a headset after someone's worn it, and or the expense of shipping it around in a time of COVID. But yes, there are absolutely programs that exist that are ready to be used to address diversity and inclusion initiatives, and just email me.
If I could just say, I'm sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and also just in terms of bridging the gap, one organization that we've been doing filming with, XR Libraries, trying to get 360 cameras, headsets into a lot of libraries. So that way anyone can just go and rent out the camera and be able to, check out and see what they created. Again, there's coronavirus, so there's a lot of, questions around that, what's applicable. I will mention in terms of that dementia study that is happening, I believe in Canada, we have discussed with one of our partners who does projection. They have like a projector system that does a 220-degree projection. And in these studies with Alzheimer's patients, they ask them, do you want to use a headset or do you want this projector? And 90% of them say the projector. So again, I don't know if this speaks to a generational gap sort of thing, or it's just more comfortable to not have something over the head. I know everyone gets like the red marks and stuff, but I think that also can be a solution maybe with coronavirus where you don't have to sanitize something as much. I mean, I'm just kind of spitballing here, but something I've thought about.
And I wanted to comment on the use in human capital and various learning development. First of all, the obvious place, and especially in a remote situation, is the onboarding experience when people do not, there's a lot of conversation about how we're going to onboard people who are joining companies in this environment. And so I've seen some interesting, solutions. Some companies are offering it. Or if you have a remote team going forward, how do you bring people together to one place? And there's everything from doing design thinking sessions together. Stella, I've actually experienced it. I spent some time with MasterCard VR team, and they're looking at commercial applications of this as well as using internally for development for various assessments in the psychology space where we need to test out, in real time and simulated environment. So how do we move away from doing assessments with answering questions in a survey, right, to much more real-time behavioral testing? That's kind of one of the things that is happening on the HR side. And one of my most memorable experiences in this virtual reality, I actually visited Anne Frank's house. I don't know if you had that, and that was just, it's been almost a year since I went through this, and I just can't get it out of my mind, how impactful it was. To your point, Robin, I think it's so powerful, especially in the moment we're in. How do we train police to actually have the experience of people who they're, touching out there in public? So
actually, a number of people this week, quite a number of people have mentioned to me, oh, your company should pivot to do this training for police. And I just want to say a word about that, which is there are, I think it's a really complicated space with no easy solutions. There have been companies trying to figure out how to crack that nut. that started, many years ago. And I mean, this is a known problem, right? And so there have been many players in this space. It's particularly challenging for first line responders, of which police are, because you have heightened physiological arousal and you are literally making life or death situations in the moment, either their life or the other person's life. And I think that I'm not sure that VR is the solution for that. I don't know what is. I mean, I think if it were the solution, there are enough people working on this, it would have been solved. And I think the fact that it hasn't speaks to the complication of the.
I think it's a number of factors that come together. Like, they have budgeting. I've seen other VR companies where they're doing shooter simulation. It's about, are they going to take the budget for that and put it toward empathy instead? Or maybe both. I mean, I don't know. But ultimately, I think that what is important is that they do more empathy training. And in order to do that, they need to allocate, and they need to actually put that forward as a mission statement. Right now, it's very few police forces that are even doing it, and it's very sporadic. And what they found from the studies is that people, while they retain it, it's something that with empathy, they tend to lose it after a couple months. And so it's something that needs to be continuous training every 6 months or something. And I'm not the expert in that area at all to gauge the research, but I think that it is important that they start to do that, because it can have major changes. You can't go back in time and save someone's life in real life, but if it's VR and you make a mistake, then you can actually learn from that before real life happens. And that's, I think, very important.
Right. No, absolutely. I think it's just it appears to be much more complicated than it looks at the beginning, because there are companies already working on it and collecting data. And if they found the solution, we'd know about it, and it would be, a sort of national program. So I wish that it were as straightforward as it appears that it is. But and that's again, I think, to go back to the issue about human capital management and ROI and sort of it being a tool, which is, there are many things that people think are great ideas, and it in the history of innovating in the office, and it's about then seeing if it works. And so much of success is about the intersection of different factors, right? I don't know how familiar you are with research methodology lingo, but most of life is not main effects, it's in the interaction. And what works in one office doesn't necessarily work in another, because it's contextual, and that's where the interaction effects happen. And so I think that makes it interesting, and unfortunately it also makes it a pain.